Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Sennett. Thank you for being here tonight for the second meeting of the Delegate Analysis Task Force. Tonight, we're going to talk to Hillary Niles, the head of the freelance community, and Colin DeVille, the president of the Deadline Club. And we're going to go over the proposal from the last delegate meeting that would have, among other things, giving communities delegate votes and sort of why the communities felt that was important and why some chapters had concerns about it as well. So Hillary is going to kick things off tonight. One question that I was hoping, Hillary, you might be able to answer to sort of kick things off, just so everyone on the task force knows. Could you sort of tell us what a community is, what the freelance community is, and what some of the great work that you all do?
Sure, thanks. And just to clarify, is Dan, you're planning to speak and introduce the international community too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So hi, and nice to meet you or see you for those of you who I haven't met before. I've been chairing the freelance community for, I've been actually trying to remember, I think about 4 years now. And our most recent membership roster had us at about, I believe it was 359 members as of December. So the community, as opposed to a chapter, which is, just organizing like journalists of all different types who share a geography in common. The idea behind a community, and I should clarify, I was not involved in starting the freelance community. It was already up and running. And when I went freelance, I discovered it, and the freelance community was actually really my gateway to SPJ. And the idea of a community within SPJ is that it's organized not by geography, but by an affinity, interest. And so we have freelancers, members of SPJ who are freelancers from all over the country, and some international members as well. We really emphasize the community in our name. So freelancers working in isolation, it can be a very lonely way of going about making your living and getting your job done. And you lose out on the camaraderie of the newsroom because you don't have, just those casual, like the water cooler conversations, but also just the casual, like, grab the person at the desk next to you to say like, oh, hey, I'm about to submit this public records request. Would you mind taking a look at it for me before I send it in? That type of thing. And also the professional development, the support for professional development that comes from a structured newsroom we don't have. We're responsible for providing that for ourselves and keeping our own fires lit under our own butts. And so the freelance community convenes freelancers to share intelligence, to share information, to share resources, and to encourage and inspire each other. We've seen a lot of growth the last few years in the wake of just continued consolidations and layoffs with newsrooms around the country. And so a lot of people are experienced journalists, but new to freelancing. And so we help connect people with resources to really like treat their freelance business as a business, and know how to and know how to do that and take themselves seriously as a business owner in addition to a journalist. So we organize conference proposals, proposals for conference sessions at the annual convention. In the past, we've submitted, we work on that collectively. The freelance community is run by an elected group of a board of 8 elected members. Everybody who is who runs for the board has to be a member of SPJ, and again, it's 8 members, the current structure. We have a chair, a vice chair. Stacy Overton Johnson, who's on the iPhone, is our vice chair. We have a membership coordinator, a programming coordinator, a resources coordinator, and 2 at-large members. And we work collectively to develop those proposals for conference sessions. In the past, we've submitted as many as 10. And I think we've had as many as, I'm going to say 5 or 6 accepted. We've also in the past had as few as 0 accepted. And we went totally rogue in San Antonio and put on our own, we put on our own conference sessions just in public spaces and any room that we could commandeer. And that actually was a phenomenal moment of recognition for the freelance community. And we felt that that really put us on the map in a new way. So in addition to organizing both the session proposals and also sort of like extracurricular programming at the conference, we also run a Facebook group. That's where a lot of our current engagement happens. We have well over 2,000 members of the Facebook group. And to be clear, we do open up membership to the Facebook group to people who are not members of SPJ. We look at it as actually like that's an intentional strategy to, for one thing, you know, just include more people in the conversation. And also it's sort of a little bit of an enticement to, it's a way for us to reach more freelancers. And it's also a way for us to entice more people to join SPJ, because we do have some of what we offer is only available to SPJ members. So that's about, yeah, I'm not sure the current number actually, but it's well over 2,000 members. That is really closely monitored. One of these days I should do an audit of volunteer hours that go into running the freelance community, because even the moderators of the Facebook group put in really quite a lot of time every week. And we have clear rules. We vet everybody who requests to become a member of the Facebook group. We have clear rules for engagement. It's closely moderated. And I am so proud of that virtual space, because it is like literally one of the internet's few snark-free zones. It is a really positive place where people share a lot of intelligence and support and encouragement for each other. And that's across all levels of freelancing and experience levels in journalism and as freelancers. So that's great. We also have a really successful Twitter account, which has over, I'm sure it's up over 5,000 followers as of now. We maintain a lot of digital resources, including basically a digital book on how to be a freelance journalist, and some amazing databases of like submission guide, pitching guidelines, and other opportunities for freelancers, such as grants and fellowships and trainings that are available to freelancers. We also publish a weekly newsletter that highlights all of the new additions to those databases and new highlights from the Twitter conversations and from the Facebook conversations and so forth. And that's been a great way to engage with our members. I'm also really proud of the fact that not only do we have a full board right now, in the past we have had 1 or 2 empty seats. We have all 8 seats filled currently. And as an example of the engagement among our members, even though none of the seats for the board were contested this past fall for the elections, and that's actually my goal. I would love to see a contested election, because that's a sign of a healthy democracy, and a lot of people who, you know, like have passion for it and really want to volunteer. We actually didn't field a candidate for the membership coordinator this year, and none of the other seats were contested. Nonetheless, we had a really strong turnout of members who took the time to go through that ballot and cast their votes anyway, even though they knew it wasn't going to make a difference, right? And all of the, of course, there was a write-in, opportunity for each of the positions. And for that blank membership coordinator position, we had, if I recall correctly, 14 write-ins, which I thought was so impressive. And I actually happen to know for a fact that some people wrote in themselves and other people wrote in, other people. And it turned out that Hazel Becker got the most write-in votes, even though she hadn't even planned to be the membership coordinator. And so she's now our membership coordinator and we have a full board. But I just think that level of engagement is what really inspires me and tells me that we're doing something that matters to the people we're trying to serve. I'm also really happy that we have been promoting volunteer opportunities and we're getting people involved and engaged as volunteers, even if they don't have a titled position on the board. That's part of the strategy for really keeping the leadership fresh. We also have a new programming coordinator, Solomon Smith, who is on the Zoom meeting as well. Solomon attended a virtual happy hour at the last conference and was just fantastic. And I recruited him hard. He he asked a lot of questions and he made me really work for it. And it's incredible to have him on the board now as well. Solomon is working on ramping up our programming so that we're now planning to offer virtual programming every single month. We'll have larger events quarterly and then smaller events on the months in between. And part of my pitch to Solomon was to recruit him to join, was that by offering like more programming and programming that is of specific relevance to a diversity of journalists, that's how we can help the freelance community achieve our goal and live our values of trying to just be more relevant to a diversity of journalists, get more people engaged, and ultimately see the leadership of the freelance community just stay really fresh and excited about that. So that is, I guess, a summary of the freelance community as a whole. And I feel like I should stop talking now.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. I also want to mention that Hillary, I'm the president of SPJ New England, and Hillary is one of our valued members in SPJ New England. So she does great work, and we hope we never lose her. So Dan, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the international community and the great work
Yeah,
you're all doing there.
well, yeah, the international community is the great hidden community and committee within the SPJ. We found out from so many of the leadership in the SPJ now even that they're surprised that that our operation exists. It's been 25 years I've been working on the international side for SPJ. Basically, we don't have the same structure the freelance community has. We're working our way toward that. My co-chair and I are pretty much running everything with a few additions here and there from some of our more active members. We have been getting more and more guest hosts for our sessions, so Elle doesn't always have to be there for our sessions. And I should talk about what we do in terms of these sessions. Twice a month, we hold talks with either foreign correspondents or experts in a field of interest that ties in domestic and international issues. Just last night, we had a session with the CBC about why they took their comment section off their Facebook feeds in order to protect not only their journalists, but also their sources. And it turns out that, and they didn't realize this was going to happen, and I haven't heard this from anybody else yet who has also been dealing with this issue. Once they took the comments off and got rid of the toxicity that comes from wild, crazy comments in these things, the CBC started posting more diverse articles. Before, the articles that were posted were pretty safe, white bread kind of stuff. Now they're really getting into wildly diverse and interesting issues that they were afraid to put up before because of the toxicity of the situation. So on the journalism side, it's been spectacular. And their head of technology who led this thing is willing to talk with us again. And we're going to be proposing this as part of the discussion for the national convention. Coming up, we've got in her first public presentation, the acting director of Voice of America. And she and the editor for Style and Standards will be talking about what they did to protect the editorial independence of Voice of America in the last year or so of the Trump administration. And if anybody paid any attention to that, you will know that Trump administration was trying to turn Voice of America into a propaganda arm for the White House. Basically, the international community is the eyes and ears of the SPJ overseas, around the world, not overseas, but on international issues. We made sure we were in the discussion on the protection of journalists and press freedom in Hong Kong. In fact, as a result of this, we have members in Hong Kong because of what we have done through the committee, or the community. Protection of press freedom in Myanmar, standing up for Danny Fenster, sorry. Press freedom in Nicaragua. You name the issue, we were there. I was interviewed repeatedly on South Korean television and in newspapers talking about their press freedom issues. So we reach out. It's a gigantic reach out. Most of the people who are with us in our Facebook page or who participate in our events are not SPJ members, but many have become SPJ members as a result of coming to our events. And we continue to push membership on people who participate and on our Facebook page. And that's pretty much it. You know, it's just been something that Al and I are doing largely out of a love for seeing the connection that there is a global local connection.
That's cool. And you guys, both the freelance and international community, are doing fantastic work. Do you know how many members you have right now? Or...
Well, again, we don't have the same kind of structure that others have. So yeah, we've got about 500-600 people. And again, in our Facebook page, and again, like the freelance group, we vet the people before they come in. So these are by and large foreign correspondents or journalism educators. We've got about 300-400 people as subscribers to our weekly newsletter. And if anybody here is not on our newsletter list, you should send me your email. I will include you on that, because it not only announces our programs, but we also provide links to very important stories about press freedom, but also seminars that other organizations that we've worked with seminars they have. And right now, this is the fellowship season. So there's a lot of places advertising for fellowships, and we're putting those into the newsletter as well.
That's fantastic. So the one thing I was hoping you could both talk about a little bit is the proposal at the last convention that would have given communities delegate votes, and sort of why that was important to you, and why what you think the communities would have gained from it, and that.
But Hill, if you don't mind, recognition is the bottom line. I mentioned, for 25 years, I've been beating my head against the wall within the SPJ to get people to understand there's an international factor to everything we do. It's only been in the past couple years, past 2 to 3 years, that it's beginning to sink in, but we still have so many leadership on the national and on the local levels that don't even know we exist and don't even know why we exist. And so just basic recognition of a very important part of what journalism is about is why we need to have, if we're not going to get recognition any other way, we'll get it as delegates in the convention so we can officially have our voices heard.
Hillary?
Yeah, I would say, it's a simple matter of representation. I think that when SPJ was formed, and I actually don't know the history of the delegate system, but I know that communities didn't exist when when SPJ was formed and when the delegate system was created, and that's why the delegate system is based around chapters, is because that's how the organization was structured. Communities do exist now, and there there are 2 ways for members to engage, 2 primary ways for members to engage with the organization: through chapters and through communities. And members are able and encouraged to be members of both. The more engagement they have with the organization, the more likely they are to, stay on as members and get more deeply involved and rise through the ranks of leadership in the organization. So the more engagement, the better. That's just a given. But since the delegate structure was created at a time that predated the creation of communities, I think that's why it's based around the chapter structure. And what strikes me as odd about it is that currently the delegate structure does not reflect the structure of the organization. So to me, that's like the main disconnect that I see with how the delegate system is organized now and what the proposal would have rectified. If somebody were going to form SPJ today with both chapters and communities, I think there's no way they would create a delegate system that was based solely around chapters. I think that it would be created to reflect the structure of the actual engagement and the way that people engage with the organization. So that's the main reason that I supported just for sort of like the logical reason that I supported, for me, what seems like a logic, that's just on pure logic. Also, I think that the representation is important, was important to me and to other board members, because if and when the delegation is considering any vote or resolution or anything that affects the communities, the whole concept of representation is to be, represented in a conversation and a vote that is going to be affecting you. And currently we don't have that. Now, there is, it has been suggested to me that community members are represented through the unaffiliated delegates. And I don't know how much y'all talked about that unaffiliated delegate structure at the last task force meeting, but I would just counter that's not true representation, because people who are members of the community and maybe not be members, might not be members of chapters, but they're members of the community, they're not unaffiliated. They are affiliated. They're affiliated with a community. And so assigning that head count to the unaffiliated delegate representation, to me, again, just doesn't make sense. It's just not accurate. And so I just don't see why not create community representation within the delegation. I think it's really important to understand and to underscore that the delegate representation is a totally separate issue from membership. So as Adam said, I am a member of my local chapter. I was a member of my local chapter even when I lived 4 hours away and couldn't get to any events of my local chapter, just because to me, it made sense. I wanted to avail myself of all of the resources. And, and I did drive down to Boston every once in a while from Northern Vermont for a couple events. And that makes sense. We actually want, as the community, we want to encourage engagement with the organization as a whole and engagement with the profession as a whole, because that's what we're volunteering to serve. I mean, yeah, the mechanism is SPJ, the organization, and specifically the freelance community, but it's not about either one of them. It's about the journalism, and it's about the people doing the journalism. And I think that if we stay really focused on what is best for our colleagues, then that makes us relevant and important. And that is what the organization will flourish on. And engagement in the organization, if we believe in the organization, is what makes the most sense. Telling people that they can join and be members of this thing, but they're not represented in the vote, I think does not encourage engagement the way that I would like to see it encouraged as one of the leaders of the organization. So those are a few reasons that I feel that it makes sense. And I would also just add that I understand that there is concern from some chapter leaders about losing their own delegate representation and having their numbers decreased in the delegation. And I'm totally sensitive to that. I am not going to view that as like, it's not a zero-sum game, and I'm not playing for delegates. I'm playing for journalists. I want to encourage the members of the freelance community to also engage with their local chapters and be as active as they can, because that's just going to be good for them, and that's going to be good for the organization. And so then it's therefore good for the freelance community. It's not, I don't look at it as a competition. I tell freelancers all the time about the international community. I'm not going to be like trying to siphon off members of the international community to designate the freelance community for their delegate vote, like if this were to come to pass, because my philosophy with the freelance community is like, let's just be awesome and let people do what they're going to do. And I am not interested in like fighting for delegate representation. I'm interested in the delegate representation reflecting the structure of the organization. And I'm interested in serving journalists and helping this organization and our profession thrive.
And Hillary, I think you raised one of the biggest points, is the issue of delegates. And I've given the technology we have today, why do we even need delegates? I mean, you know, we could have participants from around the world, SPJ members, attending these things in the same, even the live events, because they would be hybrid events just like this, and participating in discussions and getting votes made. I just don't see the need for delegates straight out. I don't know why we're not just voting straight across.
Can I
And
ask a
that's-
question?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. But Dan just brought up, that was going to be the question that I was going to ask in terms of representation and making sure everybody's voices are heard. Do you think that a one person, one vote system would alleviate that? The concerns that the communities have, would it help the communities get what they want in terms of making sure their members are represented in the system?
I think it would also help with the smaller chapters. Let's face it, they're only getting, at best getting one delegate to come to a national convention. Well, they might be able to have 4 or 5 or 10, all 10 of their members actually voting and being a part of the organization.
I will say, I personally don't have an opinion about that. That is not something, I should say the suggestion for the change to the delegate structure was originated with the bylaws committee. It did not originate from the communities. The bylaws committee thought that it would make sense. And so they did float the idea by us and ask for our feedback with, about the proposed changes to the national bylaws. And I knew next to nothing about the delegate system at that time. I offered like some really basic feedback, and I just figured that people who had thought about this a lot more than I have, because like I said, I didn't even know about the delegate structure and the delegate system at the time. So like whether it makes sense for there to be a delegate system, I don't know, but I do think that if we are going to have one, it should make sense and it should reflect the structure of the organization and the ways that people are engaged.
Mr. Chairman, this is Israel.
Yep, go ahead.
Can I go back to what Hillary said? Hillary, I don't want to skim what you just said, and I want to make sure I understand. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I want to make sure I heard correctly, and then if you can give me more meat to what you just said. You said that this idea about representation by the communities, that it came from the bylaws, and once the idea came from the bylaws and it was put out, then it came to the communities, that this was not something that communities put forth. Did I hear that correctly?
I can say that I did not, I had heard conversations about the delegate system. And frankly, maybe it's because I'm not organized enough as a chair of the freelance community, but I was like, dude, I got other things to do. And that was not high on my priority list. Once I came to understand what the delegation actually is, because remember, my involvement, like the freelance community, was my gateway to the organization. I hadn't ever been to an SPJ convention before. I didn't know what the delegation did. I was just busy running, helping to coordinate the freelance community. So once I gained an understanding of what the delegate system is, then it absolutely became something that I dedicated a significant portion of my free time this summer to learning and advocating for.
All right, let me just ask the following question then. If that's the case, when you say that I believe that that what we have now should be, and I'm reading your notes, it should be a representation of the structure.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure, because Adam said, what do you think? Should it be more about one person, one vote, one member, one vote? It would seem to me, and please forgive me if I'm reading too much into this, that the structure of the organization as Dan just said, and what you would aspire to have, that it would be therefore one person, one vote, and that the delegate system doesn't represent what we should have.
Oh, I gotta tell you, I am not interested in wading into the waters of whether there should be a delegate system or not.
Well,
I don't know. I don't feel that I'm educated enough about, you know, no, I haven't. Again, like, I haven't spent my time thinking about that specifically, but I just think that if we are going to have a delegate system, then communities should be represented in that system.
Yep.
So if we are going to have a delegate system, then it should be represented. But I hear Dan saying, but we really shouldn't even have a delegate system.
I'm just questioning whether there should be a delegate system. Because I just see the SPJ as being more than just a handful of people who show up at the conference.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Dan, do you think having a one person, one vote would give more representation to the communities and to the community's members?
Well, the organization, it's all how the organization deals with the communities and the committees. If there's no support from the national organization for the communities or the committees, then these organizations are not going to move forward. I think, between freelance and international community, I think we're doing very exciting things that are bringing in new people to the organization, and they should be represented one way or another. And I would think that our members in France and in Hong Kong would like to be able to vote at a conference and vote on issues, but they're not going to fly to Washington or Austin or Seattle in order to do that.
Can I ask?
Go ahead. We also have Colin who
Okay.
is here to speak as well. So
Dan, when I hear it's going to depend on the support the organizations get moving forward, to me, recognition is different than support. Tell me if I'm wrong. Recognition is you have a vote and a say in what could impact your organization. Support to me is the front office in Indiana will help me do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, it's actually they're incredibly linked, because the front office support is important, and we've never had a problem with the staff of the SPJ helping on international stuff. It's been the elected leadership that has had no clue that we exist. And so we're not even part of their consideration. Over the past 20 something years, we have put numerous proposals together for the conventions. And only rarely do we get even one item put into the program. That's recognition. Okay, that's a political recognition from within the organization, not staff recognition. We've always had that. We've always had the support of the staff to try to do things, but it's been the elected leadership that's been behind on understanding the connections of what we do. And I don't know what the situation with the freelance community has been with staff and with the elected leadership, but we have always been pushed way in the back and ignored on so many levels, but not by the staff.
So I know Stacy had her hand up, and then we also have to go to Colin as well after that. Sorry, I hope I didn't cut you off.
I just had a quick, so this is Stacy Overton Johnson. I'm the vice chair of the freelance community, and I am also assigned on this task force. I have a question about just so I understand it. And so if there's anybody out there who's not going to ask this question, understands it, the one vote system, which I thought, very early on, I was like, yeah, of course. Why don't we do one vote? Everybody gets the one vote when we're electing officers at the national convention, right? Same thing. And then I cannot remember who I was talking to about this, but I sat in on the board meeting at the convention. I just watched it on the Zoom call, the annual meeting. And there were several votes taken during that meeting that for various things, small things, big things. And I just want to throw out there that when we're talking about one person, one vote, all of those little things would never get done, right? If we need one person, one vote, or if we've got to, throw everything out there to vote. So that's where I think, as much as it would be nice to not have a delegate system, I don't know if the one person, one vote thing will work for all of those small things. I think we'll run into issue after issue with that. And maybe I'm not understanding that right, but I saw several things voted on that were decided in the moment.
So I just want to say, were you talking the annual convention or board meeting? Board meetings.
Whatever the end of year meeting, the annual convention, that's the one I sat in on the end of September.
Okay, I just
I
want to
think
make sure
that
I
was
was clear.
I think that was the delegate meeting, Stacy.
Yeah.
I remember, yeah, I think that was the delegate meeting, Stacy,
And
because I remember
someone, I don't know
texting
who
with
it
you
was. I don't
through
know
it.
if it was, it was someone who's been here. It was like a Robert Becker. I don't know if it was Robert or Hazel, but talked about the one, how nothing would ever get done if it was one person, one vote on every single item. So there's got to be,
Right.
We got to think that through before we even, I don't know, even broach that. I don't think that's even feasible unless, and if we're just talking about elected officials, we already do that. I get just as much of a say in the elected officials as anybody as a freelancer. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there and make sure that everybody here at this meeting, make sure I was understanding it correctly, but also that everybody here on this task force understands how many things are decided through these delegates and through votes. And this is not something that seems feasible at all to just, okay, you're going to get this thrown out. Okay, on Monday, we've got to throw this out to all of our SPJ members to vote on, and now we got to do it again for this task or this, I just feel like it's a lot of, I would be very disengaged if I kept getting asked to vote on these random things,
That's a good point.
So we also have Colin who's here. So we have an hour limit, so I might have to, if we get cut off, I might have to make another Zoom link. So I apologize. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But Colin, are you still with us?
Sure. Do you want to prompt me with a question or?
Yeah. So there were lots of chapter concerns about the idea of giving communities delegate votes. I'd love to sort of, if you could go over what some of those concerns were and.
Sure, I'll relive the trauma of last summer.
It was a lot.
So first of all, for those who don't know me, I'm Colin. I'm the president of the Deadline Club in New York City. I was a former membership chair as well, I guess a couple years ago now. So, I was part of the group that was concerned about the bylaws change related to communities and chapters and delegates. Part of the reason is because we weren't going through the process we're going through right now with this group. It was kind of railroaded, in my view. There was a 60-day deadline to decide on it, to make a decision about it. After it was presented to the public before the convention. So we had 2 months in the summer to figure out, what does this mean? What are we voting on? What are we deciding on as an organization? And that's what really a lot of us felt was the biggest problem. This was too rushed. Like basically what the vote meant as far as the delegates go, the language in the law as it was written, or the bylaws change as it was written, created this competition, whether purposeful or not, between communities and chapters. Because what you had to do in order to assign the delegates was choose whether you will be represented by a community or a chapter. And my I love communities. I promote the freelance resources that the community puts together all the time. And I think that we coexist peacefully now, and that everything is good. But it's like when you have the decision point for people to make, when it's like, oh, what am I more closer to? I live in New York. I'm a freelancer. I like the freelance community. I'm gonna go. You know what? I'm gonna be freelance community now, and I'm just gonna vote on behalf of them. Frankly, I don't think that's gonna happen in New York. I'm not worried about New York. I'm fine. We have 225 members. We're growing. I'm not worried about our delegates. It's just the smaller chapters is really what I'm most worried about, especially in areas where there aren't a lot of newsrooms. New York, we have the benefit of having plenty of those. So it's just in smaller areas where there are I guess a smaller pool of chapter leaders, right? Why would you want them to compete with a community, when it comes to representation? And if someone from a chapter, a smaller chapter, decides they want to get more involved with the community, chapters dissolve, because of those sort of things happening, because they don't have the leadership locally to keep them going. So I just wonder about us cannibalizing ourselves in a sense by creating this system of competition, which is, again, it's maybe not purposeful, but the way that the proposal at the time was presented, the way that it was written, that's what many of us felt, and it wasn't just me. I mean, it was soundly defeated in the vote. So it wasn't like a part of what we want is this process to have more debate about it, to have more time to analyze it and think it through. I think is the one to the delegate proposition to have like one vote for all in a delegation is a good one. I mean, we have the capability to do that. Sure, it'll be like like people will not be totally engaged on what's happening, but that happens anyway. Like that people aren't totally engaged on things that are presented now when it comes to a convention. But giving people the option to get engaged or not is important. And I think that is something that we should look at. I mean, the technology is there to support it. If it's a 51-49 vote with 6,000 people voting, I mean, what's the difference? So yeah, I mean, I don't know, like that's basically a lot of the concerns that we had, and that's why this group of chapter leaders and I were concerned about the proposal.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you, Adam.
Cool. I had to log in on my phone because my computer just crashed on me. But thank you very much, Colin. Does anybody have any questions for Colin?
Well, I can respond to Hillary's. So like, yeah, maybe it's a abstract thing to think about, but when you're deciding an identity for yourself, when you do that in a delegate situation where you have to decide on whether you are represented by your community or your chapter, you're like deciding where you want to be represented and where you want to be more involved, right? I mean, so over time, you siphon off time, your volunteer time. I mean, we're all volunteers, right? We're doing this with our free time. I don't know how much time you all have. I mean, I couldn't continue as membership chair because I was becoming president of the Deadline Club. I can't do both things. I just don't have, I also have a full-time job. I have a wife, I have all kinds of stuff. I'm in class, whatever. So like we're limited of our workloads as volunteers. So when you have people trying to decide like what camp they're in, whether they're a freelance delegate or a chapter delegate or an international delegate, you kind of stick with that group, right? I mean, you're just gonna That's just where you're going to put more of your energy, if that's where you're what you're voting for, what you're represented by, you know. And that's basically what I'm saying. And over time, that kind of chips away at some of the smaller chapters.
Yeah, I think that's a theory. I don't think that I understand that cognitively as a theory. I also know from the composition of the board of the freelance community that we have several chapter leaders on our board who are really loyal to their chapters. And I also know that there's a lot of energy to like bring freelance programming to the chapter that they're really involved in. And so I see it, I just see more evidence of, I see evidence of cross-pollination that benefits both entities, that makes me dubious of the theory that delegate representation, and choosing that, which is like a choice that you make once and then it's done.
If you're on a board, but Hillary, if your proposal was to create a board, basically for the communities, right? And it would include delegates. So like, have you asked the chapter leaders who are involved in the freelance community, what delegate system, what representation would they choose? What would they say? I mean, no, it's abstract, it's theoretical, sure, but you have to think about the long-term impact.
No. I think it's a great question. I'm laughing because I'm just imagining that Ruth Nasrallah and maybe I shouldn't say this because I don't want to speak for her, but I would imagine that Ruth Nasrallah from the Houston Pro chapter would be like, over my dead body will I give up my delegate representation from Houston. She is so dedicated to her chapter. There's no way. And Ginny too, like Ginny's the president of Cincinnati. I wouldn't imagine that they would give that up. And I wouldn't imagine.
I think that's, Hillary, I think that's important to tell people here. Ruth Nasrallah is on the Freelance Community Board and she is the president of the Houston chapter. I now live in New York, but when I lived in Houston, I was the president of the Houston chapter. I was a member of the South Florida chapter when I lived in South Florida. And Jenny McCabe is on our board at the Freelance Community, and she is the president of the Cincinnati chapter who's won several awards for being such an amazing chapter. So I just feel like, again, like I totally second everything Hillary is saying. If I could stand up and applaud, and I would. She's just, I think she's spot on with this, that it should just be seen as more of a collaborative effort instead of a competitive one.
Yeah, and I'm the treasurer of the DC chapter, and I mean this has been my home chapter since I joined the SPJ more than 30 years ago. There's no way I'm leaving it.
Yeah.
Who's going to be a delegate? So it's like so then what are we talking about? Like we're talking about just the status quo, right? I mean, why change?
Well, Colin, for example, I now live in upstate New York, and the closest chapter to me is the Deadline Club, which is 5 hours south. I'm never coming to an event down there. I've got 2 kids and I live in, a minute from Canada. I'd love to, but I'm just, it's not feasible.
I would love
you
to come to an event.
I would love to too, but it doesn't make sense to me or for me. I've thought about, could I start a chapter up here? Newhouse, I'm close to Syracuse University. And they have a student chapter. I don't know how active that is. I have not looked into it, but there's clearly journalists around, right? So, but I don't have a home, I guess I could say right now. And the freelance community is my home. And even when I was the president in Houston, I was vice president and president. I still did just as much work in the freelance community. I love it. I did both. And everything I did in the Houston community, I would talk about in the freelance community and vice versa, and just promote everything everywhere. When we have events with Houston, I'd say, hey, you guys should join the freelance community for any freelancers I saw. But there's a lot of people like me in the freelance world who are not necessarily in that deep with their chapter. I think the people that you've got already that you count as delegates that are in your chapter aren't going anywhere, but there's a lot of
So-
people who aren't, I mean, they haven't even picked a chapter. They're just dangling out there, right? And a lot of them are with one of these communities.
So I just want to interrupt. I just want to clarify something because it keeps getting referenced, and I want to make sure everybody on the task force is just aware in terms of how delegates get allotted. Basically, as John had mentioned, it's one delegate vote for every 50 people within a chapter right now, or unaffiliated, or who are unaffiliated within a region or fraction thereof. And currently, members can be members of multiple chapters. And they can be members of chapters and communities. But when they're members of multiple chapters, they have to decide which chapter represents them in the delegate system. And in this case, if communities would get delegate votes, the members would also then have to decide, or they would have the option to decide. And so members can currently be represented by their chapters right now, or they can be unaffiliated. And unaffiliated members can also be part of communities. All of that sort of makes sense. So there's multiple ways in which people can be represented, and this would also add another layer of representation in which people would have to, or could theoretically have to decide where they would want the representation to be.
Right.
That's just to sort of clarify. I know that was really confusing, but it just kept getting referenced. So I wanted to make sure everybody
I would just,
what was being referenced.
Can I add something to what you said?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so here, what I would encourage everybody, and can you open the participation screen sharing for me, Adam?
Not sure because I'm on my phone, but I can try.
Okay. All right. So I am reading from a memo that was sent from Bob Becker to Matt Hall back on May 27, 2021. I would encourage everybody who's on this phone call, including Hillary and everybody else in the communities, in the various communities, I would go to the proposed bylaws amendments website of SPJ. There you will see a memo that I'm reading from. And so I'm reading from that memo. And the memo reads in page 2. These amendments would require headquarters to ask all members whether they want to be counted as a chapter or community member, and if so, which chapter community. Any member who has not joined a chapter or community would then be counted as unaffiliated. So when it comes to representation, which I hear from Hillary and I hear from Dan that representation is very important, you would get representation as a member of the community for delegate counts. And Hillary would probably have 6 delegates because she has 300 members.
Well, no, I think can we clarify this though? Because I think that what that memo is saying is that people who are members of both a community and a chapter would have the opportunity to decide which they wanted their head to be counted in for the sake of delegate representation.
That's
the
correct.
freelance community would not automatically, we have 359 members, we would not automatically get 7 delegates because we have no idea how many people would choose to have their head counted towards the freelance community's delegate representation versus stay with their own chapter.
Even our
Well, that
own
was-
board members would choose the chapters. Some of
Even
them
our-
would choose
yeah,
their
even some of-
chapters, right? It's not
Plus-
a,
Yeah, plus,
But-
yeah.
Colin,
So-
so that's what Colin is saying with regards to his concern. And to your concern, Hillary, about how would the delegate count be allocated to the freelance community? If you read the memo, it would still be 1 delegate per 50. So it would still, as currently stated, right? Whatever members you have at the home database, then you would have representation based on that home database.
No, we would have representation based on the number of members who chose to have their head counted toward the freelance community's delegate count. We wouldn't automatically have our delegate count allocated to be like based on the number of our members. It would be the number of our members who choose to assign their delegate representation to the freelance community.
We'd have to make sure and put that word for word so that there's no
of course. Yeah,
Oh,
of
that's
course.
that's like very strongly my understanding from a lot of research and conversations from last summer. That's very strongly my understanding of how that would work.
I think there's one thing we can all agree on. The delegate system is very confusing. And I think we've all sort of been learning a lot of different things and how this would impact. One thing I just want to mention, and I know running out of time, I'm a little worried we're going to get kicked out. Colin, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or did we?
Well, I just put it in the chat, but I was just going to
Okay.
say that the unaffiliated delegate system is
We're gonna have
is one of the biggest issues. You know, like let's work that out first. I feel
We're-
like before we
we're-
do anything new.
we're going to have a whole meeting on unaffiliated delegates coming up. But one thing I wanted to mention, because Brendan had mentioned this, I think he may have mentioned this at the last meeting. One concern that I have with where we add more and more layers of how people can be represented is, one concern that I have is whether headquarters can even handle that. I mean, it seems like there have been some chapters, Long Island is one, which Brendan can talk about this again if he'd like to, where headquarters has a real hard time keeping track of how many members people actually have. I believe Brendan had said that he had 112 members, but for some reason HQ, put him down for having 99 and they lost a delegate vote. So these types of things happen already within the system. And so one concern would be if you add another layer of bureaucracy, whether HQ could keep track of that. That's not something we can answer tonight, but it was just something that I had thought about, especially after I heard Brendan's story.
Adam, yeah, if I could speak to that, and I don't want to rehash everything I said last time, and I have a couple things I want to raise it for this go around, but yeah, I became president kind of late in the year compared to when the national convention was. So all these things got figured out before I jumped in, and I realized, hey, half of our board is not counted as chapter members. That's kind of ridiculous. And when I went through, I realized we should have been well above 99. It cost us a delegate because it wasn't taken care of. So I pressed really hard to make sure everybody was being counted. I had committee chairs who weren't being counted. I had founders from 40 years ago who appeared like they weren't being counted because they were on both the inactive list and the active list. So I got us up to like 111 or 109 or something, or it says 111, but it's really 109 because if somebody has two different email addresses, they show up twice on the chapter report. So I have to go in and figure out how many people are duplicates because they have more than one email address, which is a real flaw in the system. I checked back in January. I went from having what appeared to be 111 members to 102 members. What happened between November, December, and January that all those members disappeared? I don't know. Our treasurer of our board is an active dues paid SPJ member. He's no longer listed as a PCLI member. I reached out to National. They said they're hiring a new membership person. I don't know who's taking care of it or who's getting forwarded the emails from the old membership person, but nobody's gotten back to me. And it takes up a ridiculous amount of my time just to make sure that my own board is counted as members of my own chapter. I know Colin had raised the issue of, for small chapters, really thinning out the talent and losing a potential board member locally to the international community or what have you. I'm less concerned about that. And like Colin, I'm in a big chapter, over 100 members. I don't feel like it's very big, but compared to some other chapters, we are big. I'm not so much concerned about losing leadership potential as I'm concerned about my own members just disappearing from my own roles. If you go on to your SPJ membership right now, there's a checkbox for LGBTQ, there's a checkbox for freelance, there's a checkbox for international. Somebody checks that, when they sign up for SPJ, they have no idea what they're signing up for. They're now a member of a community for the rest of their days on SPJ. Somebody signs up for a chapter, they get kicked out of it 12 months later, and then they renew their SPJ membership. They're no longer a member of that chapter. They renew next year. They're no longer a member of the chapter, even though they show up to all the chapter meetings and they're a member of the chapter board. As far as SPJ is concerned, they're not a member of the chapter. Now, when the delegates go to get organized, I have 5 of my board members plus other random members who are now being counted towards the allocation of the freelance community or another community simply because they only have one affiliation. They're not affiliated with a chapter, even though they are in reality. They're only affiliated with a community because they checked a box when they signed up a few years ago and they didn't know what they were signing up for. And now the delegates are being lost from my chapter and going someplace else. We definitely need the system, as mentioned, that people get to pick what their primary chapter / community is, what their primary affiliation is. So I, as a chapter membership, if I also join the freelancer community, as a chapter leader, if I also join the freelancer community, I want to make sure that my head count is going towards my chapter delegates and not going towards the freelance community, not because I have anything against the freelance community, but because as a chapter leader, I know where my head count's supposed to be. I really feel like we need somebody for the national staff on the meeting again to make sure that as we come up with all these things, that the actual membership system on spj.org is going to reflect these. Because right now, I don't know how to get my board treasurer back into our club. I have no means of doing that. So I could go on, but I'll just stop there.
So
I think that's a super good point. And we have, and I can add that to that chapter community wish list for technological fixes, because that's a really good point. Like, should community membership just be perpetual, or should it be renewed on a year-by-year basis, the same way that chapter membership is?
Yep. Excuse me. I also just want to clarify from what you had said in the chat, Hillary, is my point was that membership issues are in a lot of ways a delegate issue as well, because if headquarters has trouble keeping track of members and whether members are part of chapters or not, which in Brendan's case they did, and I would imagine other chapters have had those same issues, that affects their delegate count. I mean, this is a clear example of headquarters not keeping track of his full membership list and him losing a delegate. And so by adding on another system in which somebody can be represented in the delegate system by another group, that's more work headquarters has to do to keep track of that. My question is, and they may be able to do that, my question is, do they have the bandwidth to, or the ability to do that? Because they seem to be struggling with keeping track of who's part of what chapter now and how that affects the delegate count, at least on some level. And, you know, I don't know how.
But like you said, that's a delegate issue, and there's currently no representation for communities on the delegation. So if the communities are having the same issue, then communities don't get a voice at that table for that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I mean, I really do think that that's like, being able to keep track of your members is a pretty elemental function of an organization. And I think that that should be an expectation that we all have as members, that the staff will be able to figure out how to keep track of our members.
I think it's an SPJ
that's
tradition.
Not an argument against or
right.
for representation. That's just a technological fix that needs to be made.
No, Hillary, I think it's an SPJ tradition over 30 years that I know of for sure, that you cannot keep track of the membership.
Well, and that's part of my
should be
point.
In the bylaws, right? Damn it.
Right. And currently there's two systems in which people can be represented by the delegates. There's the chapters and there's the unaffiliated system. Now the unaffiliated system has a lot of problems. Don't get me wrong. We're going to go over that. But I guess my question is creating another system in which you have multiple people within multiple areas in which they can be represented. Does headquarters have the ability to keep track of who's where and who's being represented by what? And that's something that I'm certainly concerned with, because they seem to have problems with doing that already, whether somebody's unaffiliated or whether they're part of a chapter in Brendan's case. Because I would imagine all those people that didn't get counted in Brendan's chapter were probably counted as unaffiliated members. I don't know that for a fact, but I don't know where else. They would have fallen into a bucket where they were represented.
Right.
So that's that's just a question. And as Dan mentioned, the membership issues go back 30 years. So hopefully we can get those resolved. I am certainly optimistic and hopeful, but it's just something I wanted to raise. So we have gone over our hour. I don't know if I want to make sure we didn't miss anything. Does anybody have anything they sort of want to add, or do you think we missed, or anything like that? Any other questions?
A couple, a couple people did ask to be put onto the international community newsletter. They've been added. So, and advertise this event coming up for the Voice of America. It's going to be a good session.
Fantastic. If you send the link to me, I'll also send it to Chris Vaccaro, our regional coordinator, and he can send it out to everybody as well. So thank you all very, very
Looks
much.
like
for
Becker's
I think,
got his
I think
hand up.
Robert Becker wants to speak, and I think it'd be good to hear from him.
Sure. Very, very quick, because we're
Okay,
over.
I just want to address, since Israel brought up the memo, I want to address what is in the memo. In the system as it exists today, if a person joins SPJ and says at the same time, I'm joining X chapter, that person will automatically be counted in the chapter. If the person doesn't express a desire to be in a chapter, they're counted as unaffiliated. If a person is a member of more than one chapter, because they live in one place and work there, but they work for a newspaper across the country, they get to choose which of the two chapters they're counted in. That happens now, so that they're only counted in one place. Under the new system, as the language of the bylaws were written, the same thing would happen if a person initially came into SPJ as a community member. They would be counted in that community. If they dropped out of the community at some point, they would no longer be counted there. If they joined a chapter and the community, again, they would continue to be counted in the first place they were or where they live. In other words, if you're in the community first, you would be counted in the community. If you were in the chapter first, you'd be counted in the chapter, until you say, I want to be changed from one place to the other. So this was all taken care of in the language of the amendments, so that people would have a choice if they were members of more than one entity, but if they were not, they would be counted where they started out. And that's all these amendments did. Enacting those amendments would not have changed anything. It would not have required anybody to choose anything. The status quo would have prevailed, except that the unaffiliated members, who were also the people counted as unaffiliated, who also became chapter members, would be then counted in the, community members would be counted in the community that they had joined.
Right.
They would no longer be unaffiliated. The goal was to have fewer unaffiliated members, to have more people in some entity that gives them value and gives them a reason to continue to be members of SPJ. That's all it was done to do.
Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Hold on, Adam. Hold on.
Oh, Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I need to ask a follow-up question to Bob. So I just want to make sure that we have it on the record.
Mhm.
As I understand it, Bob, last conference, you were an unaffiliated member. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you a member of the DC chapter?
No,
Were you a member?
I
of the
haven't been a member of
chap-
the DC chapter for several years.
All right. So is it possible, Bob, that somebody could be a member of a chapter and on a given day, I'll pick a date, April 1st, could that person call headquarters and say, today, I don't want to be part of this chapter. Now I want to be unaffiliated. Is that possible?
I think that happened this year.
Okay. So people
Okay,
could
and I will
go-
tell you how it happened. Let
Good.
me tell you how it happened. Okay, because at the end of 2020, the Deadline Club put out a list of its board and its advisory bodies. Okay, that for the coming year, for 2021. Alex Tarquinio was listed as a member of its professional board, not its board that operates, but its advisory board. By the time of the convention, Alex was no longer a member of that chapter. She was a regional delegate with 10 votes. Now that means before somewhere around June 1st, she resigned from her chapter. That is the only instance where that's happened that I know of,
That's
because I know
That's not true.
I have been a
That's
That's
regional
absolutely not
delegate.
true. That's absolutely not
definitely
true.
Well, who else immediately before the time for appointment of delegates resigned
Andy
from
Schatz.
chapter?
Andy Schatz.
Andy Schatz did right before.
I don't know when Andy did, okay?
Yeah, we got a date, April
We
27th.
got it.
I can
Yeah.
tell you
Okay.
that from
And
headquarters.
okay, and do you know when Alex did?
You might be, your date is a good guess as
Okay.
mine.
I
wasn't
would
able-
hope that wouldn't happen. I don't think that should have happened. I don't think it should have been allowed.
Well, first of all,
I
it
know
did
that-
happen. It
Okay.
did happen. So
And-
all
but
I'm trying.
that's got to
Bob,
do with the regional delegate system. The bylaws committee, when that came up, recommended against that system. It did not like it at all. But the president at the time, Paul Fletcher, had led the task force that created it, and Alex followed up after him. And we didn't get a choice. We argued against it and we lost.
So guys, we're gonna have an entire meeting on the regional unaffiliated delegates, which we're gonna have much more time to explore that. But I'm glad we were able to talk a little bit about it tonight. I feel like we've covered quite a bit. Does anybody else have any last thoughts about the communities issue?
We rock.
The
yes,
communities
yes,
are
you
great.
do. Yes,
Chapters
you
are
do,
great.
Dan. Yes, you do, Hillary. Very true.
So perfect. Thank you all very, very much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. And we're hoping to have another meeting towards the end of the month. So hope to see you all there.
Bye.
Hey, thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a